Thank you, everyone. I come again. Someone sent me a question asking me about um, the the quality of life in Australia compared to the life in Canada. And of course, I've lived in Australia for about 2 years. I lived in Australia for between certain period of years. I think I lived in Australia for over 2 years, and then I moved to Canada. I lived there for um, about 4 years. So the movement was because I wanted to move family from Nigeria to the Western world, to Australia. But moving family from Nigeria to Australia is pretty difficult compared to moving family from Nigeria to Canada. Canada will, at a go, move family immediately because Canada is more family friendly compared to Australia. Australia, I was in Australia the first time I got to Australia, and I told um, a lady that I have my family back home. The lady called me aside and told me in confidence that they may never come. I was like, ooh, my family may never come? That is sad. So the lady, you know, advised that I should seek other means or wait for 24 months or more, before I could bring family. So, but going back to the question, comparing Australian life to Canadian life. So, I would say that it's it's a, it's with mixed feelings to say their lifestyle is almost the same thing because they are both advanced world. So so there are some peculiarity that makes Australia great, and there are also peculiarity that makes Canada excellent. Like, let me start with immigration first. Australia is very tight. I would say Australia is the most difficult country to go get into, or the most difficult visa to ever for anyone to obtain in the whole world, and it's very expensive. Their visa is very expensive. Let me use this example. When I was going to file for my spouse in Australia, one of the reasons why I had to get out of there, the spousal visa as at that time in 2017 is as high as $7,000. In fact, as at the time I was leaving in 2019, it was already $9,000, if I'm not mistaken. But in Canada, the same spousal visa was just $550. So look at the disparity. For Australia, to bring your wife is $7,000. But in Canada, to bring your wife is $550. To bring your children in Australia, I think it's about $3,000 thereabout per child, if I'm not mistaken. I think that at that time it was around that size, but it depends on their age. If somebody is less than 18, I think it's about 1,000 plus. But I wasn't, having a child then to bring over to Australia, so it was just my spouse. I know that of the spouse very well, that it was about $7,000. So for Canada, it was cheaper. Now, in Australia, Australia is a beautiful country. That's the most beautiful country I've ever lived in. It's a beautiful place. The weather is excellent. Um, the beautiful thing about Australia is that they grow their crops. What they eat, they grow it. Of course, they import some, but of course, they can grow. They farm all year round. That's what I'm trying to say. The weather does not affect agriculture. While in Canada, practically 9 months of the year, everybody's locked down. There's snow everywhere. There's no farming. So the period of farming is minimal. And the crop they basically grow in Canada is a cereal called, I think it's sorghum or something, which they export to China. You know, they don't really, Canada does not really grow its food. They probably grow their food, I think, under a controlled environment. So the major food producer for Canada, it's Mexico. So most of the Canadian food is Mexico and the US, the shipping food, because the weather is not favorable to agriculture. So you get to eat food that have been on the road for a long time. That's why most of the food in Canada, especially perishable ones, fruits, vegetables, and so quickly get destroyed or damaged or perish. Before their shelf life is very low, while the shelf life in that of Australia is very good. There is, I hate to say this, but of course, there's extreme racism in Australia. Extreme racism in Australia, yes. There is extreme racism in Australia. There is subtle racism in Canada. Subtle. They're very polite, but their racism is subtle. I don't know what the black skin has done, but I faced severe racism over there in Australia, and I faced subtle racism in Canada, which really, the one in Australia didn't affect my mental health because obviously it was it was up to you, it was right in your face. But the one in Canada was subtle, and it was affecting my mental health. So I had to, like find a way of escape. Like I was dying. So that has to do with Canada and in terms of mental health and that of Australia. In comparison, I'm comparing right now. Another thing that I will compare to Australia and Canada is their citizenship. In Australia, you will get your citizenship after 4 years of living in Australia, while in Canada, you get your citizenship in less than 3 years. So, if you want citizenship quickly, you can get it faster in Canada than in Australia. Another thing that I know that is way different is that in Canada, you can actually go to Canada by all three means of transportation. You can enter Canada by road, you can go to Canada by air, you can go to Canada by sea. But in Australia, there are only two ways you can get in and out of Australia. It's either you fly or you go by ship or you go by sea. So I was really afraid because it's an island. So I was really, really afraid because what if anything happens? What if there's an earthquake? What if there's a tsunami? And what if the island is sinking and all that? That one reason why Australia does not allow people bring seed to Australia, so that it doesn't affect the topography, the natural strata of their soil or their environment, their vegetation, so that you don't bring seeds that are meant to grow in Africa, you bring it to Australia. They will never allow. They take at the airport. They'll scrutinize your luggage like you are, in quotes, a terrorist. Just to ensure that you're not bringing anything that's going to affect their environment. And I support them in that, because that island is exposed to environmental danger, weather change and all that. So those are a bit of the differences of living in compared to Australia and Canada, living differently. Another thing that I can say is different is the currency. Australian dollar is of course a bit lower than that of Canadian, but they are almost at par, but just slightly low. So most times if you have Canadian dollars, you are a bit richer over there. Another good thing about Australia compared to Canada is that their minimum wage is way higher in Australia compared to Canada. And Australia is not a tax economy. I would say Canada is a tax economy. Australia is more of an industrial economy. Australia is a major industrial hub. compared to Canada. So uh, if anyone wants to, make a choice, if I will choose again where I would want to live, um, to Canada, compared to Canada and Australia, I would rather live in Australia because the weather is good. I can heat my food. The shelf life is a lot better. Despite being Canadian, I still like Australia because of the weather, the food. You know, you can get, you know, you can get to enjoy the weather in all year round. You don't get to stay indoors for like 9 months as it used to be, in Canada. Canada for 9 months, you'll be so depressed. You'll be locked indoors. In fact, it was worse for me during COVID when we were working remotely. I was indoors and I was working indoors full time all year round. So Netflix was my best friend. And it was very depressing because all you do is maybe have video calls with people overseas or friends even within Canada. You can't. It's very difficult to go out to meet people and all that. Everybody is stuck indoors, so it was a very depressing life. But in Australia, I never witnessed that. It was in Australia you go out all year round. And to close this, in closing, I think the weather in Australia are too, especially for summer, is of the extreme. In Australia, it is so bad that vehicles, cars, get their color, you know, faded. Their color fades on the rooftop, the bonnet, or well, yeah, the bonnet and the boot, which Americans call the trunk. So because those places are exposed to the sun, they get to get faded off. So people get to paint their car almost maybe every year or every 2 years or something because the sun gets to bleach off the paint. Australia was a beautiful place. I really do love the place, and I think that's been my experience with both countries. I would say you can go to either. I'm very grateful to Canada because I could get my citizenship on time. I met some great friends as well, despite the subtle racism. But I think it was worth it. It's just a stone throw from me here in the U.S. So I advise anyone who wants to go to either of the country to give it a try. But in a lifetime, I think you should visit those countries. I heard a lot of people say they've never been to Australia. Australia is a tourist destination. You should go. It's a beautiful country. And it's all lies that there are snakes, there are big spiders everywhere, and all that. Yes, there are snakes. I heard about the snakes. I heard the snakes, hissing and all that, but I never saw one. I only heard that there are spiders. I never saw any spider. There are no poisonous animals there. They were not there. I lived for years there, and there was nothing. I was not afraid. I was going about my life fantastically well. So there was nothing. And Australia is a beautiful island. Everywhere you turn to, you walk 500 miles or 500 kilometers or whatever, you meet the beach. You'll be getting to the beach. Everywhere you go is the beach. It's the beach. It's the beach everywhere. So it was all a beach affair on every weekend. And Australia is close to Thailand, to Fiji Island, to Japan, to all these very beautiful countries. So it's a very great destination. I would advise anyone to go and live there. Thank you as I bring other videos.